So today I'm going to make a video where I'm going to look at the current standings and compare it to the standings that was last season when the 2021 MLS regular season finished. And the whole purpose of this video is just going to look at how each team's start to the season, as we're now more than 1/3 of the season, is compared to where they finished last season in the 2021 standings. And as are going to get to the Western Conference, boy oh boy, that's when the standings basically look unrecognizable compared to last season. And that I will also talk about some discrepancy because not every team plays the same amount of games. Though, for most part, I think everybody has already played double-digit games. So, there are going to be some teams that I'll mention that have played fewer games that does have a chance to rise up the table. And when you also look at the standings-wise, one thing that I've seen with the standings this season is the fact that, if you are a team that is dead last in the league, you actually have more points than for most previous season, because there also really isn't a team that really sucked this year. I mean, the worst team so far this season is between the Chicago Fire and the Vancouver Whitecaps, and yet we're 1/3 into the season, they've already have 11 points, and that they're on verge to get 30 plus points, which in previous year that would be a high amount of number for teams that is going to win the wooden spoon. I mean, previous year we've seen teams that got like 20 points or 24 or even like around below 30 points in terms of winning the wooden spoon. So that just also tell you how competitive this league is, and also the fact that in terms of the standing wise, both standings when I look right now are pretty compacted, as it is the case in the beginning of the season. But it's also kind of compacted when you look at how the standings is between the teams that are just barely making the playoffs, that the playoffs started today, to the teams that is chasing to get themselves above the red line. But let us actually look at the Eastern Conference first. So in first place right now, we have the Philadelphia Union with a 6-6-1 record and have 24 points. Now last season, they finished second in the East, and so far in terms of the position, actually it's not -1 that they have. So actually let me just change this. They actually gained one spot instead of -1. So yeah, there we go. Let me just change that there. So they didn't really make much improvement in the Union, at least for this season, if you ignore the bad runs that finally was ended after they got a big victory against the Portland Timbers over this weekend, are pretty much almost the same. I mean, they're playing the way that they are kind of the same that they was last season, which is a team that is able to grind out, resort, and get themselves near the top of the standings. Then we've got Nycfc, who have a 7-2-3 record with 23 points, and they finished 4th last season in 2021. Now, the reason why Nycfc didn't really finish as high as some people thought that they would is that they did have that bad run toward the October, or not October, but around the September and October run, and they did finally turn it on to really rise themselves up the standings. But at least right now this season, we've seen them go off to a really good start and have 2 spots higher than they were last season. Then we get to Orlando City, who have a 6-3-4 record and have 21 points. Last season they finished 6th, and keep in mind, like last season, Orlando was kind of almost in the same position that they were in the last season, when they were like in the top 4 for majority of the year. So in some way, the reason why they didn't do very well is that they kind of hit a wall near the end of the season, but they still gained 3 position compared to where they were last year. And then we get to 2 teams I'll mention that is currently in the playoffs that weren't in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, and one of those teams that is currently in the playoff position is Montreal, who have a 6-2-5 record and have 20 points. Last season, we know that they finished in 10th place, and they made up 6 spots compared to last season. And if I would have done this video a little bit earlier, when they were at the top of the Eastern Conference, they would have made up a whopping 9 spots compared to where they were last season. And again, I don't think a lot of people are surprised because of the way that Montreal has really done well this season under Wilfried Nancy, and especially got off to really now a great start after just such a terrible way to start the season, where they lost their first 3 games. Then we get to New York Red Bulls, who currently have a 5-5-3 record. Again, if I would have done this a week ago, they actually were very high in the standings. But recently, the Red Bulls have struggled not only at home, but finally they lost their first road game of the season, and that kind of dropped them to 5th place with 20 points. But like I said, there's not a lot of difference between 1st through 6th. Like 1st through 6th is only 5 points difference, so that's why the standing wise is going to change as we even head into the next weekend's matchup. But currently in 2021 we have the Red Bulls, who barely made it to the playoffs, in 7th place right now, or in 7th place last season, and they improved 2 spots from last year. Then we get to the other team that didn't make it to the playoffs, and this is also one of the team that is probably the biggest surprise right now to be in the playoffs position, is FC Cincinnati. And again, if I would have done this a week ago, they would have been even higher in the standings. But right now they're currently in 6th with 6-1-6 record and 19 points. Last season we know they won the wooden spoon in 14th place, and they made up 8 spots and could have been double digit if I would have done this video last week. Then we got Charlotte FC, the new boys, who currently have a record of 5-1-7, and they currently have 16 points. Obviously they didn't play last season because they're an expansion team, but even for an expansion team's sake, and especially coming into this season, how everybody were talking about how this team was going to do badly, and the famous quote that Miguel Angel Ramirez says that they are screwed. They're actually not doing that bad, and again their home form has really risen up the way that they are currently fighting for some of the playoff position. Though they're currently tied with Atlanta United, where now we're going to get into the team that's currently below the red line. But Atlanta is actually tied with Charlotte right now with 16 points with a 4-4-4 record. Last season they of course finished 5th in 2021, so they did drop 3 spots. And Atlanta is the team that I think this season they were hoping that maybe they could take the next step, and it hasn't happened, mainly due to the fact that they have had a lot of injuries to deal with this season. Then we get to the team that is probably the most disappointing in terms of this season compared to last year, which is the New England Revolution, which talk about how they are a team that is clearly not at the same level as they were when they won the Supporters Shield last season. Currently have a 4-3-5 record and have 15 points, and last season we know that they won the Supporters Shield in 1st place and have a -8 total. I think I'm probably even going to make a video in the future looking at teams that won the Supporters Shield and what happened in the very next year, because that would be a very interesting video to make of whether or not, we talk about championship hangover. Do Supporters Shield hangover exist in MLS? And again, I don't know if I have made that video yet, but if I haven't, I'll definitely will talk about it, because the Revs are definitely having that Supporters Shield hangover, with them dropping 8 spots compared to where they were last season. Then we got Inter Miami, who currently have a 4-3-6 record with 15 points, and last year they were in 11th. Pretty much they're one of those teams that were pretty much at the same as last season. A very inconsistent team, though things have started to be better ever since they got off to such a terrible start to the season, becoming one of the last team to get a win, and the last team to get a win in the Eastern Conference, made up 1 spot compared to last season. Then we got DC United, who have a 4-2-6 record and have 14 points. Now, last season they of course finished 8th and just barely missed out on the playoffs on decision day. But still, this season, I mean, it could have been worse. If they were still under Hernan Losada right now, and the way they were not doing very well to start the season, they could have dropped more than the 3 spots compared to what they have last year. And in fact, if I would have done this video a little bit earlier, DC, I think heading into last match week, they were actually in 8th place, so they were actually in the same spot as they were last season. And again, when you look at the standing wise, I talk about 1st through 6th, it's kind of a logjam. Well, that's kind of the case when you look at 7th all the way down to 14th, where it seems like the East right now, there's 2 different logjams. There's a logjam in terms of the battle for the top spot, and then there's kind of a cut-off line here between Cincinnati and Charlotte, where all these teams are only within like 5 points of each other, between just making the playoffs to now being at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Now we got the Columbus Crew, who currently is in 12th place with 3-4-5 record. They have 13 points. Last season they finished in 9th place and have a -4. And really, Columbus, the issue that they had this season is almost similar to last season, except I think this season we've started to find out that, yeah, indeed Columbus is not as talented as what we thought thought last season, because even with some of these players that it is back after suffering from long-term injury, they're still not as good as what we saw when they won MLS Cup back in 2020. But then we got Toronto FC, who, by the way, TFC is actually the only team on this video I'll talk about where they actually made no improvement whatsoever. I mean, they finished 13 last season. They're currently in 13 with a 3-3-7 record and finish with 12 points. And again, or not finished with 12 points, but currently have 12 points right now. And again, for TFC, it's the same issue as last season. Last season they have problem in terms of defending and also scoring. This season, it's kind of the same thing. They have problem in terms of defending, though. At least I would say that this season they have been able to score goals in some of these games, but it's just keeping out of the goal from ending up in their own net is once again an issue for this team. And then in 14th currently, I think they are. I'm not sure if they're currently on the wooden spoon spot, because right now they're tied on points total, and I didn't really look at the goal difference and also the goal score. Or actually, no, I think they are right now in the wooden spoon, because Vancouver does have more wins than Chicago. Chicago have a 2-5-6 record with 11 points, and current last season they finished in 12th place, so they dropped 2 spots. And you can say that, after that promising start that they had in the beginning of the season for Ezra Henriksen, it seems like that new head coach kind of boost has really wear off of this team, because once again, this team, it has not worked out for them. All the moves that they made so far has not turned out, and really, that's kind of the life of the Chicago Fire, a team that has regularly been at the bottom of the Eastern Conference for those past couple of years. And one other thing that I also want to kind of mention in this video is that this video is kind of used as a way to show whether or not if indeed there is parity in MLS. Because as we're going to get to the Western Conference, that talks about whether parity exists and whether, we will see each of these team maybe be continuously dominant in the standings compared to if we do see some parity, maybe some new teams get into the playoff position, and maybe some teams that didn't do so well last season, they're now doing good, and now teams that did good last season are not doing good this year. That is pretty much what we're seeing in the Western Conference, because my oh my, right now in the West, literally the 7 teams that is in the playoff position right now, only 2 of them made it to the playoffs last season, and one of them aren't even in the same conference as last season. As if you not include Nashville SC, who made it to the playoffs in 3rd position and now in a playoff position, only one team from last season in the Western Conference that made it to the playoffs is currently in a playoff position, and that team actually almost missed the playoffs too, as we'll definitely talk about. Well, actually, I won't even just kind of reveal a little bit later. That team, of course, is RSL, who they sneak into the playoffs on the very final day. Though that being said, even if they didn't make it to the playoffs, I think the team that was in that playoff position but dropped out in the final moment because of RSL scoring a late goal was the Galaxy. But still, I mean, it's kind of shocking the fact that literally when you look at the Western Conference right now, it almost like the standing has completely flipped compared to last season, where teams that did not make it to the playoffs are playing much better, and teams that made it to the playoffs last season are doing really badly in the first 1/3 of the season. And we start off with the first team that has that and that of course is LAFC. In fact, the top 3, I mean, the 3 teams that is in the top 3 right now in the Western Conference, they were either near the bottom of the Western Conference, or they're teams that they were fighting for playoff position but ultimately folded off. And one of those teams is LAFC, who I mentioned last season. They were probably the most disappointing team in the league, with the way that they have so much talent in their team, and yet somehow in some way they found a way to not even make it to the playoffs. They currently have an 8-2-3 record and have 26 points, and last season we mentioned they finished in 9th place, which again, that was such a surprising but also a very disappointing season in their standards. I mean, never mind not winning MLS Cup, but not even making the dance. That is just one of the most embarrassing seasons we've seen a team have embarked after such a high expectation in the beginning of the year. But this season they definitely have got back to their highest level. And I will say that one thing that is kind of difference between now the LAFC at the top compared to previous season is that this LAFC team isn't really as dominant as what we've seen in previous season, and that a lot of credit has to so far go with Steve Trillo, who he's started to prove the doubter, including myself, wrong with the way that he's at least pushing the right button, especially in the second half, and especially with his substitution, as this team has really led the league in terms of the most goals scored in the second half and the most goals so far scored by a substitute, and they made up 8 positions compared to last year. Now for Austin FC, another team that last season when they were in their expansion year, unsurprisingly they didn't really do well, finish in 12th place, but all of a sudden they're now in second in the West. And if you just not talk about whether or not if they can sustain this because of just a murderous schedule that they are in the mix of playing right now, it's so incredible the fact that they went from a team that at least did kind of had a respectable record there near the end after they just were in complete free fall in the beginning of the season and were almost in the same level as FC Cincinnati of how they were in the expansion season. At least they finished the season respectable last year, though it only got them to 12th place, and this year again it seems like they carry the same momentum that they had in the second half of the season, and now have a record of 7-3-3 and have 24 points, and they actually are the most improved team so far this season, made up 10 spots compared to where they were last season. And the other team that also had a big improvement is FC Dallas. Again, another team that were kind of fighting for the playoff position, but ultimately they kind of fall out as the week goes by. 6-4-3 and have 22 points, and last season they finished 11 and have improved 8th spot, and a lot of that isn't just because of the fact that once again that we have seen some academy players from that Dallas team that has really risen, or players that came out of the academy has really risen, but also for the first time they've finally got it right in terms of some of the transfer signing. I mean, guys like Alan Velasco, Paul Arriola, and even their goalkeeper Martin Paz has really been a difference maker and really has built this team to probably be the most underrated team and the team that is flying under the radar, because we talk about teams that in there at the top of the standings, but I don't think a lot of people have talked a whole lot about how FC Dallas is kind of very close to being at the top of the standings, and nobody even realized that because of an under the radar season that they're currently having. Now another team that is currently having a good season is RSL, who again, they're the only team that is currently in a playoff position that made it to the playoffs last season. I mean, that is just insane. The fact to think that they're the only team that made it to the West and that is still in a playoff position. I mean, we'll get to talk about all these teams that is near the bottom or right now below the red line of what has went wrong for them. But for RSL, they have 22 points, and last season they barely made it to the playoffs in 7th place, and they improved with 3 spot. And then you got the LA Galaxy, who were the team that missed out on the playoffs on decision day, 6-2-5 and have 20 points. And currently they are in 8th place. But I've talked about how the Galaxy is definitely on a downward trend right now. And if I would have waited maybe a week later, they probably would be kind of lower in the standings. Again, when you also look at the Western Conference, there's not really a whole ton of gap between top 2 near the bottom. I mean, between first all the way down to, I would say, well, actually, there is a little bit of a gap between first through second with LAFC and also LAFC have a 4-point lead over Dallas, and Austin have a 2-point lead. But other than that, if you look at first all the way down to 9th place, there's only like an 8-point gap, which is not a big gap considering if you look at the team that is at the top of the West compared to the team all the way near the kind of bubble team that's trying to fight for those playoff position. Then you got Nashville SC, who of course last season they made it to the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. This year they have a 5-4-4 record and currently have 19 points, and are a team that, as expected, are started to make up some ground after they were on the road for so long. But they, despite being on the road for so long, they are actually in a good position where with so many home games at their new stadium in Geodis Park, I expect this team can really rise up the table. I mean, after all, I did predict them to finish first, and that they're not that far off of that. Like, they're only 7 points off of that, and especially with the way that this season, it also seems like you simply can't predict how each team does, and we don't have like one specific team that just kind of blow it out of the water. There could be a chance that they can can rise up the standing, though they did drop 3 spots compared to where they finished last season in 3rd place. Then we got the Houston Dynamo, who last year they finished dead last in the Western Conference, but this year, off to a really good start to the season, 5-3-5, and have 18 points and made up 6 spots compared to last year. Though again, with the Dynamo, it'll be interesting to see whether they can sustain it, because they're in the midst of a really tough stretch where they have to go on the road 4 straight games. Though they did win their first out of four straight on the road in the last game against the LA Galaxy. They've got Minnesota United, who have a 5-3-5 record and currently have 18 points. There's actually a freeway type right now with teams that have 18 points. And I believe on the league website, it says Minnesota is currently in 9th place and Colorado is in 8th place. But when I look on Google, which that's where I put the standings, they put Minnesota in 8th place and Colorado in 9th place. And what's fascinating is that not only both of these teams are tied on points and they have the same record, but they have pretty much the same goal differential too. So I think the next tiebreaker was goal scorer, and I think Colorado probably scored more goals compared to Minnesota, which again, not a big surprise, because the Loons is one of those teams that I've mentioned many times before. They've struggled to score goals, and that has really kind of is the reason why they have once again have a bit of a mediocre start to this season. But as they're in 8th place, and that if I know last season they finished in 5th place, but don't let that distract you from the fact that the standings between 5th all the way down to 8th place in the Western Conference was incredibly tight, and Minnesota just kind of get the benefit of the doubt that they got the highest position out of that madness of decision day that we saw in the West on the final day of the season. But they did drop 3 spots compared to where they were last year. Then we got the Colorado Rapids, who have a 5-3-5 record and have 18 points. Last season, we know that they were one of the biggest surprising package, if not the biggest, with them finish at the top of the Western Conference. And this season, really, what has kept them to not really have a disastrous season is their home form. They're a team that started to kind of go back to where the Rapids were a couple of years ago, where this is a team that do well at home for the most part. But when it comes on the road, that's when it's been a problem, because I don't think the Rapids this season have actually won a single road game, and hence that's why they're so low in the standings and have dropped 8 spots compared to where they made it to 1st place in the West last year. Then we got the Portland Timbers, who of course went to MLS Cup. So I talked about MLS Cup hangover, and right now it seems like in terms of that, it doesn't really quite exist with NYCFC, because they're doing well so far after winning MLS Cup. But it kind of is existing for the Portland Timbers. And so many times when we talk about MLS Cup hangover, we don't talk about the team that lost the MLS Cup and whether if they can have a hangover too. But at least right now it seems like that's the case for the Portland Timbers. I mean, it's been a disastrous start for Giovanni Averi's side. 3-6-5 and currently have 15 points. But despite the disastrous start, they're still in touching distance of making the playoffs, though. I think they also played 14 games this season, so they actually played the most out of some of these teams that played 13 games. So yes, they're in touching distance, but some teams are going to leapfrog them because of that game advantage. And last season they of course finished 4th place and have dropped 6 spots compared to what it was last year. Then we got the San Jose Earthquakes, which I think this is really the only team out of the team that is currently below the red line that also did not make it to the playoffs last season, because right now this team made it to the playoffs, this team made it to the playoffs, this team made it to the playoffs, this team especially made it to the playoffs, this team made it to the playoffs, and even Vancouver made it to the playoffs last season. So yeah, I mean, that just shows you that the Quakes, they are kind of where we thought that they were, though again, they are on an upward projectile. And, they have definitely played better under Alex Cavallo compared to Mateus Almeida, and currently have a 3-5-5 record and have 14 points. They did drop 1 spot compared to last season when they finished in 10th. And they were in the playoff hunt for a bit, but they was also one of those teams that were in the playoff hunt, and then ultimately they weren't, because they lost a couple of crucial games down the stretch. Then we get to the Seattle Sounders, and I talk about discrepancy in terms of the standings, because there are teams that you can maybe make an excuse of why they're not doing well this season. And I think the Sounders is probably the discrepancy here. Again, I know they're gonna pick it up. Like they're a team that so far have played some of the fewest games so far. I mean, they currently only play 11 games compared to some teams that have played like 13 and 14 games so far. So if they do win their game advantage, they would definitely jump up to like right around here in the standings. But as of now, they do have a 4-1-6 record with 13 points. Last season, they of course finished second, and even though they are 10 spot away from where they were last season, everybody knows that this team is going to rise up, and that the whole reason why they're not doing very well is because that CONCACAF Champions League thing. And remember how they of course won that thing. I mean, I know I feel like I've been mentioning every single video, but that event is just such an important event, not only for the Sounders but also for this league in general. That I mean, you can use that as a general excuse of why they're not doing well, and that again, if they can win those games in hand, they can definitely get themselves higher in the standings, because between them and if you look at some of the teams that is above the red line, they're not that far away. I mean, only 5 or 6 points. If they can win those 2 games in hand, they will be right in the mix. And that's not even talk about how some of these teams will also maybe drop points, because as I mentioned, this league this season, there doesn't seem like one team that has just completely dominated the league and completely is head and shoulder above everybody as of now. Then we get to Sporting KC, who again one of those teams that made it to the playoffs last season. But last season we talked about Sporting KC was heading toward a downward projectile, and it seems like it's continued heading into this year. 3-4-7 and have 13 points and finish in 3rd place, and they have dropped 10 spots compared to where they were last season. And again, there's a lot of speculation of what has went wrong with Sporting KC, and is this really finally a time where they just kind of tear down their old core and start new? And even some speculation of whether or not if Peter Vermees could actually last this season, because the way that seems like the game kind of finally passed him, and that some of the decision making that has been questionable in the past couple of seasons has started to kind of caught up to them. But also, not to mention, they also have been dealing with some back-breaking injuries, especially losing some key players because of those injuries. And then we get to 14th position, and currently the team that is dead last in the West, and the team that I think many times people have said that this team has been the most snake-bit team and probably the most cursed team this season, is the Vancouver Whitecaps. And what's so snake-bitten for them this year is that I mean, they not only have been dealing with so many injuries, and the fact that their snake bit season continued with them, had to even call an emergency goalkeeper who, how I said in the preview or in the review that emergency goalkeeper didn't come out of their academy. Oh, that actually isn't correct. He did come out of the academy. He was about to sign with the Vancouver Whitecaps to the MLS Next Pro that is affiliated with the Whitecaps, and he's basically thrust into the starting spot, and that just kind of sums up this season for the Whitecaps, where they just cannot catch a break in terms of the injury bug. That they're kind of like the Columbus Crew of last season, where they have suffered so many injuries that has really decimated their team. But also, not to mention the fact that this team feels like, last year, how when they were in that good move, and that Vanni Sartini really has got that team to believe in a way where it got them to as far as making the playoffs. That belief is now completely gone, and that right now they are dead last in the standings with 3-2-7 record. Currently only have 11 points, and last year they made it to the playoffs as a 6th seed, but they have now dropped 8 spots compared to where they were last year. So talk about how in the top 3 where teams have made big stride, but when you look at the bottom 3, teams have basically completely underperformed compared to where they were last season. Though again, I'm going to exclude the Seattle Sounders. I will say the bottom 2, because I talked about the Sounders. You can use a discrepancy, the fact that they've been in CCL and they have played the fewest game. I expect them to go up in the standings. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think, which team has improved the most and which team have definitely fall off the most so far this season, because we're only 1/3 into the season, and we know that you can't win the league this early in the season, and especially with so much left in the season, and that it seems like this year it's kind of unpredictable, and that I mentioned no team have really pulled away from the league, and that we're really starting to kind of see a little bit of a parity where any team can beat any team at any point this season. I mean, I know that sounds like a cliche, but we've seen some big upsets so far this season that has really tick the balance of the league a little bit compared to what we've seen in previous year. But let me know in the comments below still, which team do you think has improved the most compared to last season, and which team has fall off. And also, let me know in the comments below in terms of teams that is in the playoffs right now, which team can potentially drop off as the season goes along, and which team that is currently below the red line can rise themselves up in the standings. In fact, I'll probably maybe make a video about that, because that's something that I think when I was listening to Extra Time Radio podcast this week, they kind of talk about that, and which team, of course, can make a run that is currently below the red line, and which team could potentially suffer a setback after a good start to the season. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.